Okay, so there's this whole generation coming up now, born roughly between 2010 and 2025. They're growing up completely immersed in the digital world, like
Right.
from day one. And you hear the buzz all the time, right? Generation Alpha. They're supposedly wired differently. Maybe they're struggling, definitely glued to screens. That's the narrative anyway.
You're absolutely right. There is so much noise, so many assumptions floating around. So, to really get a handle on what's actually happening with the education and training of these kids, we've pulled together quite a few sources for this deep dive. We've got a big systematic literature review, which basically pulled together findings from all over the world on Gen Alpha's education. Then there's a news article with observations straight from a school superintendent. And another piece looking ahead, thinking about how this generation might impact higher education down the line.
Right. So our mission today is to take all that, try to cut through the hype. Let's extract the really important insights and see what the research actually tells us. What do we really know for sure about Generation Alpha in the classroom? What are the big concerns popping up globally based on actual studies? And crucially, how are educators and schools trying to adapt? Okay, let's dive in.
All right. So first off, who is Generation Alpha? Generally, we're talking born between 2010 and 2025, give or take. And the really key thing here, I think, is that they are genuinely the first generation to have grown up with the iPhone, with that kind of constant digital immersion available right from birth. They're also expected to be, well, huge. The largest generation in history, potentially hitting almost 2 billion people by the time the last ones are born.
Wow, 2 billion. That scale is just massive. And you're right, that constant digital thing feels like the defining trait. The sources we looked at describe digital devices for them not just as like an occasional tool, but as what was the phrase? A normative and necessary means to interact with the world. They're the ultimate on-demand generation, aren't they? Totally used to getting everything instantly. I saw that anecdote too. They're unlikely to carry a physical wallet or maybe even take a traditional written exam. It really does feel like a different operating system sometimes.
Yeah, it feels different. But here's something that was genuinely surprising, especially coming from that big systematic review, considering how much we talk about them being different. The central finding was basically this. Despite the term Generation Alpha being used all the time in research, relatively few studies actually report solid generational differences. Differences that really show how these kids are characteristically distinct from, say, Gen Z or earlier generations.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So everyone assumes they're fundamentally different, but the research hasn't actually broadly tested or confirmed that.
Yeah.
That feels, well, it goes against the whole story we hear.
It absolutely
Yeah.
does. The assumption is everywhere, but the empirical evidence, direct comparisons showing characteristic differences, it's surprisingly limited. Sometimes it's even disputed. You just don't see many studies directly measuring things like, say, digital fluency differences across the generations.
Okay, that's a huge takeaway right there. The assumption versus the actual data. Now, the review did mention some observations, right, like from that one small qualitative study where preschool teachers felt they saw differences. They described Gen Alpha kids as more curious, less rule-bound, sometimes ill-tempered, very mobile, maybe self-centered, but also having high self-esteem, emotional, conscious, but maybe more closed off and individualistic than Gen Z. And there was that inference about them being more entrepreneurial because of cognitive flexibility. But then also sometimes negative things cited like lack of loyalty, thoughtfulness, compassion, stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. But it's really important to stress, and the review itself stresses this, that a lot of these frequently cited characteristics, they actually come from just that one small qualitative study. It's valuable, it's observation, but it's not large-scale proof of a fundamental defining generational shift.
Right, right. Crucial context.
Yeah.
Okay, and the news article we looked at, the one with the superintendent, that had another angle. He also felt Gen Alpha was different, specifically pointing to struggles with persistence, resilience. And he linked that back to the instant gratification you get from social media.
Yeah. So you have these observations, these strong feelings for people on the ground that they are different. But the hard comparative data across generations, it's just not widely established yet. But okay, if we connect this perceived difference, whether it's fully proven or not, to the bigger picture across all our sources, one major, really consistent worldwide concern definitely emerges. This is where everyone seems to agree. The extensive use of technology by Generation Alpha is strongly linked, or at least there's a strong concern it's linked, to decrease opportunities for social emotional development and potentially increased mental health problems. This isn't just one country worried about this, it's showing up everywhere.
Yeah, and it's kind of easy to see why when you look at the numbers that were cited. Over 80% of parents saying their Gen Alpha kids watch videos or play games on a mobile device every single day. And average screen time reported as high as 7 to 8 hours a day.
Well, that's a lot.
Those figures are definitely concerning, and they're being directly tied to some negative impacts, or at least predicted impacts. Increased mental health challenges are a huge part of this conversation. Things like anxiety, ADHD, depression. They seem more common in kids with high screen time, and the worry is this trend will continue with Gen Alpha. And beyond mental health, you hear concerns about losing oral communication skills, because they rely so much on texting and chat, and also worries about critical thinking. Like, are they just accepting info from influencers online without digging deeper?
And this isn't just a Western thing either, is it? The review pulled concerns from all over. You mentioned Slovakia worried about emotional intelligence. Romania noted that low digital literacy among adults was an issue, meaning kids weren't getting deeper tech skills. Plus, parents were maybe more worried about eyesight than online privacy. Indonesia. Low engagement from preschools in educating parents about gadget use, lack of rules at home. Malaysia reported high gadget dependence leading to anxiety, kids getting upset without phones. And Russia found links between lots of virtual leisure time and lower self-esteem, more anxiety, and kids distancing from parents. It's really striking how consistent those concerns about social emotional stuff and mental health are, popping up again and again across totally different places.
Absolutely. So given this widespread feeling that Gen Alpha is different and these very real concerns about tech's impact, well, the pressure naturally falls on educators to adapt. But the research is pretty clear on this. Teachers and educational institutions are really struggling to keep up. The speed of tech change is just relentless.
Yeah, that struggle came through in several studies. Like one in Spain found future teachers only had a medium level of digital competence. In the U.S., older professors were apparently less likely to bring social media into class, maybe seeing it as irrelevant. And teachers in Malaysia needed specific training just to create stuff like VR lessons.
Which points directly to a big training gap, doesn't it? Institutions globally seem to recognize this, but actually fixing it is hard. You've got future teachers in places like Brazil and the Czech Republic saying they feel unprepared, even while acknowledging that the kids themselves are totally at ease with tech. In Indonesia, lack of tech support and training was a direct barrier. And even longitudinal studies in the U.S. looking at support for new teachers found it didn't have much impact on their confidence with using classroom tech.
And it's not just about the tech skills, is it? The generational mix among teachers is also a factor. There was that study finding differences in work ethic, relationships, tech use, willingness to change, patience. Across boomers, Gen X, millennials, boomers felt they resisted change sometimes. Millennials saw themselves as flexible. Gen X felt they were like boomers, but others saw them adapting. So yeah, teaching digital skills effectively gets complicated by the teacher's own backgrounds and comfort levels too.
Definitely. But despite these challenges, there are some interesting models trying to improve things. Indonesia, for instance, has a national effort using something called the TPACK framework. That's technology, pedagogy, content knowledge to measure teacher capacity. It helps pinpoint strengths, often in teaching methods and subject knowledge, and then suggests specific tech training needed. And specialized training, like using augmented reality for English teachers in Turkey, that shows potential too if the teachers actually see the tool as useful and feel confident they can use it. Self-efficacy is key there.
Although, as the review mentioned, not every try is a home run. Like the mixed results with flipped classrooms in Malaysia, teachers liked the idea, but apparently felt the students just didn't like watching the assigned videos. But what's clear, teachers are trying things. They're innovating, experimenting. We saw examples like Ukrainian teachers developing ways to help kids evaluate internet sources critically, Slovenian teachers using internet reciprocal teaching, basically using online interaction to boost literacy. And yeah, integrating games, robots like Lego Mindstorms, and math and other subjects. So lots of attempts happening, but like the review said, there's no single killer app or method that's emerged as the clear winner yet.
Which brings us to thinking about education more broadly, right? Rethinking it from national strategies all the way up to higher ed. At the national level, some countries are trying to figure out what's needed. Croatia had experts debating dynamic, gamified teaching versus professors worried about losing social interaction. But actually implementing big changes faces massive hurdles. Algeria was a case study where social, cultural, economic factors just stalled tech integration. So these national-level discussions haven't really turned into widespread, effective policies yet, it seems.
Okay, but what about specific subjects? Language programs seem to be doing some innovative things with tech, seeing success with smart and creative methods using gadgets. That was in Indonesia for learning multiple languages. Also blended learning for reading there, and game-based stuff like Waterford Early Learning for English literacy. And STEM and ICT programs, maybe not surprisingly, are leaning into Gen Alpha's assumed tech skills. Robotics curricula boosting STEM interest, especially for younger kids and girls in the U.S., frameworks for computational thinking being developed for early childhood in places like Kuwait and the U.S., and project-based research in Ukrainian primary schools showing promise.
Yeah, and other areas are seeing movement too. Social emotional learning models are being put in place, often with parents heavily involved, like we saw in Indonesia again. That collaboration seems key. And teacher development is evolving with models using coaching and mentoring to boost leadership and tech integration, also noted in Indonesia.
Okay, so that's kind of the K-12 picture now.
Yeah.
But thinking ahead, what about higher education? How are universities getting ready for this generation? The article suggested Gen Alpha hitting college will really prioritize flexible, personalized, and deeply digital experiences, which sounds like it demands a pretty fundamental overhaul.
Yeah, the piece on higher ed really emphasized that. It laid out 4 key areas universities need to focus on. First, redefining learning. Basically shifting heavily away from traditional lectures towards interactive, visual, multimodal stuff. This means adapting to how they consume content, think micro-sized content, like 2 4-minute bursts, and really leveraging things like VR and AI for truly personalized learning pathways.
Okay, adapting to the TikTok attention span, maybe. Got it. What's number 2?
Second area, globalizing classrooms. Recognizing this is likely the most diverse and globally connected generation ever. So building in international and cross-cultural experiences is crucial. But also, importantly, supporting a growing number of international students with smooth processes, even down to how they pay tuition. International applications are way up, and remember, huge chunks of Gen Alpha are in places like India, China, Indonesia.
Right, making the whole system, including the boring admin stuff, work for a global student body. Makes sense.
Third, educating beyond a degree. This is about accepting that many jobs they'll have. Well, they don't exist yet. So the focus shifts from just a traditional degree to things like micro-credentials, flexible programs, interdisciplinary studies. Building essential, adaptable skills, creativity, problem-solving, critical thinking becomes paramount. The offerings need to be agile.
Yeah, future-proofing skills, not just delivering fixed knowledge. I get that. And the last area.
Fourth, supporting global, digital, efficient experiences everywhere. Not just in the classroom. This is critical. Digital excellence needs to permeate everything. Registration, advising, billing, payments. Gen Alpha will expect to use the payment methods they already use. Apple Pay, Venmo, Alipay, WeChat Pay, maybe even paying via gaming consoles. The sources were clear. Seamless digital has to be embedded institution-wide. Now, shifting gears a bit. The nitty-gritty tools. The systematic review found that developing and evaluating specific teaching tools for Gen Alpha, that was actually the largest area of research covered.
It sounds like everyone's just building this massive digital tool belt, hoping something sticks. And some of these tools have been evaluated and showed positive results, right? Things like VR for drawing, project-based learning using electronic media, boosting motivation in science. GeoGebra for math, augmented reality storybooks, although didn't one AR storybook study actually increase math anxiety?
Yes, exactly. A good reminder that tech isn't always the answer, or can have unintended effects. But yeah, other evaluated tools included QR codes for performance, digital math games, Jazz Chants for English vocab. VR showed up again for English vocab and collaboration. And even an Instagram-based tool got positive results for English writing.
Okay, so those have some data behind them.
Yeah.
But then there's this huge landscape of tools just being used without rigorous evaluation yet. Like everything from VR apps, serious games, popular platforms like Minecraft, digital board games, Instagram, YouTube, WhatsApp, mobile apps, Chromebooks deployed widely. And their goals are all over the place. Cognitive engagement, phonological awareness, communication, reading, computational thinking, motivation, writing skills, visual motor coordination, even teaching about waste problems.
And then there's another layer. Tools still in development. Things like argumentation games, creativity games, Android educational games, escape room apps, motion comics, digital maps, mobile learning apps, digital storybooks. Again, aiming to improve math, literacy, science, vocabulary, motivation, interest. It was interesting, though. An app for low vision students was mentioned, but overall, the review noted a surprising lack of focus on tools specifically for disabled populations within Gen Alpha. Felt like a gap.
Yeah, that does feel like a real missed opportunity, doesn't it? Especially given the potential of tech for accessibility. And speaking of downsides, with all this focus on making and using tools, was there much research looking at negative effects?
Very little, actually. The review only highlighted that one study where VR caused headaches from prolonged use. So yeah, lots of energy going into creating tech, which makes sense for this generation. But the research rigorously evaluating effectiveness, and maybe more importantly, understanding and mitigating potential downsides. It seems like it's lagging behind the development curve right now. Another area the sources touched on was blended and online learning. I mean, obviously, the pandemic forced that into the spotlight globally. But research specifically naming Generation Alpha in that context, it's still a bit limited compared to, say, the focus on tools.
What really jumped out at me there, though, was how consistently the role of experienced adults came up as crucial. Parent-child interaction was key for success in distance learning, especially for younger kids, like in Indonesia. Teachers in Turkey were explicitly recommending parental support, student participation, and training for the adults involved. And that research from Israel during the pandemic shift. It showed older teachers and younger students generally struggled more with online learning than younger teachers and older students. Experience and developmental stage really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. But despite those hurdles, there were reported successes. Integrating videos and online games seemed to help in Ukraine. Using specific learning management systems and platforms was common and often seen positively in Indonesia and Turkey. Blended learning worked better when it was collaborative in Indonesia. Indian students were okay with online learning but needed more engagement. And interestingly, U.S. virtual schools, which were already set up for online, seemed to outperform traditional schools during the pandemic, at least in perceived learning.
But yeah, the challenges for teachers were huge and varied. Communication issues, student attitudes, problems with the tools themselves, teachers' own tech skills that came up in Israel. In Slovenia, students' limited digital literacy made online communication tough. Across Indonesia and Turkey, you saw similar things. Clunky apps, bad internet, difficulty managing online classes and assessment, less interaction. Lack of basic equipment was also a big problem in Turkey.
And beyond the teachers, at the school level, well, the rise of smartphones and social media is making people question the role of traditional things, like libraries. Even universities need to rethink their whole infrastructure. And the need for more student-centered, maybe personalized environments like microschools was also mentioned as potentially better. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. What are the main conclusions, especially from that big systematic review? Well, first, despite everyone using the term Generation Alpha all the time, there's surprisingly limited hard empirical proof that they are characteristically different from previous generations in some fundamental way. It's still operating largely as an assumption, often based on observation rather than comparative data.
Yeah, that point really stuck with me, the assumption versus the actual data. And tied to that, the biggest, most consistent worry globally isn't about their tech skills being bad, it's the potential negative impact of their extensive tech use, specifically on social emotional development and mental health. That concern is just everywhere.
Exactly. And here's a critical finding. When research did show positive results involving technology for this age group, a key factor again and again was the active involvement of parents and other adults. Mediating use, guiding them, the presence and competence of experienced adults seems incredibly important for Gen Alpha's success and well-being in this digital world.
And while there's this frenzy of activity developing and testing new tools and teaching strategies, the review is clear. Nothing has emerged as the dominant, proven best approach yet. There's no consensus. We still need a lot more rigorous evidence-based research to figure out what truly works best and, crucially, what the potential pitfalls are.
And we should remember the scope, right? The systematic review only looked at research explicitly using the term Generation Alpha. There's undoubtedly tons of other relevant research on kids this age that doesn't use that label. Future research, the review suggests, needs better theoretical foundations, more direct comparisons across generations, longitudinal studies, and critically, it needs to focus much more on the roles and skills of the adults involved parents, teachers not just analyzing the kids' tech use in a vacuum.
So this deep dive has shown us something really interesting, I think. The world is changing rapidly. Technology is completely woven into Generation Alpha's lives from birth. That's undeniable. But maybe, just maybe, the single biggest factor influencing their education, their well-being, how they navigate it all. It might not be the newest gadget or the slickest app. It might actually be the guidance, the connection, the engaged presence of the adults around them.
And that really leaves you, the listener, with something important to think about, doesn't it? Given the strong assumption that Gen Alpha is fundamentally different and these very real global concerns about tech's impact on their development, how can you as a parent, an educator, a mentor, just someone in the community interacting with these kids, how can you best help them harness the good parts of their digital world while nurturing those vital social and emotional skills? How can we all focus more on our role in creating the right environment for them to thrive, finding that balance between digital fluency and human connection?